To open the video that is being streamed live. Look for the chat box on the side or bottom of the video player. This is where you can type your message. Click inside the chat box and use your keyboard to type out what you want to say. You can type words, use emojis, or even ask questions. Once you've typed your message, press the enter key on your keyboard or click the send button. Your comment will then appear in the chat for everyone watching the live stream to see. If you want to send another comment, just type it in the chat box again and press enter or send. Your new comment will show up below your previous one.
Week were called later that morning and told that their children were at the morgue. From everything we know so far, those two children, students, died following a crash of the unlicensed taxi taking them to school. Thousands of children still go to school in the rural areas in this way. And some of early childhood age, now mark you, early childhood age are stuffed into the trunk or luggage section of vehicles. These things we know, they happen every day. Good day. Welcome to the 148th episode of the Frankly Speaking Jamaica Podcast. Thank you for joining us live. Remember, the same link will take you to the recorded podcast later on YouTube. Please subscribe if you have not yet done so. We welcome your comments on the channel, and also you may contact us by WhatsApp at 876-503-9995. That's 503-9995. Now, meantime, also last week, the death toll continued to mount for motorcyclists and pillion riders. On Friday in Westmoreland, a 4-year-old girl who was one of two pillion riders on a motorcycle was killed when the bike driver failed to keep left and the cycle crashed into a car traveling in the opposite direction near Negril spot. 4-year-old girl was one of two pillion, a bike is supposed to take one, yes, on a motorcycle, killed when the bike driver failed to keep left and the cycle crashed into a car traveling in the opposite direction near Negril spot, Westmoreland. This week, we won't go over all the failed policies and the failure of successive administrations to imagine, let alone roll out a big policy change and program to a productive, decent, or efficient way of transporting people in this little island. Today, though, we're looking at the cost of the folly, frankly speaking, the folly of how motorcycles are operated in Jamaica. So far this year, 115 motorcyclists have been killed in crashes. 115, representing just about a third of the 345 people who have lost their lives in crashes on our roads in Jamaica this year. Nearly one a day so far. More than one a day so far. The percentage of motorcyclists killed has been consistently around 30 to 35% for the last 3 years or so. 30 to 35% of the overall number of people killed on the road. Increasingly, the crashes are bizarre, such as with bikers crashing head-on. Bikers crashing head-on. We know there has been almost paralysis in the response by the authorities. Frankly speaking, Dr. Lucian Jones, who was with us last week, will tell you there's a national helmet coalition in addition to other actions. Our special guest today is orthopedic surgeon for the St. Anne's Bay region, Dr. Carey Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher has recently completed research on pedestrians injured in crashes But he will be talking to us today about the research he has done on motorcycle crash victims. Today with us also are Desmond Richards and Winnie Anderson Brown, our regular contributors. We're going to start with Desmond. Desmond, what is your beef this week? Just a brief comment.
Well, I am wondering if parochial roads are going to be fixed this year, because talking to councillors and members of parliament, it does not appear that way to me. For example, the members of parliament, they have been allocated $20 million so far, and another $10 million in January. And when I talk to the members of parliament, that they say that cannot address the roads in their constituencies. The councillors, as you know, those roads that lead into districts and housing schemes in Jamaica, they are in a deplorable condition for decades. And they are calling out for help to fix these roads. And from all indications, they are not going to be fixed.
All right, so we will come back to that after we have finished our first segment. Winnie, your time.
I'll go right back to the issue of life certificates, the challenges that many seniors are facing because of the need to hand in life certificate every quarter.
Saying that they're alive.
Yes.
All right. Again, thank you for joining us. Welcome, Dr. Fletcher. Please help us understand what your research was about and why you had an interest in the motorcycle statistics. Dr. Fletcher, your time.
Okay, good afternoon, and Mr. McKnight, and good afternoon to the panelists, and good afternoon to the viewers. Firstly, in terms of why did I get into this area? Well, the interest started when I was in training to be an orthopedic surgeon, particularly at the Kingston Public Hospital, where we saw a plethora of injuries in terms of motorcycle crashes. Now, one of the things that fascinated me, both in my capacity as a surgeon as well as just simply being a human, was that I just found it fascinating, this concept that somebody could crash, get injured, lie on a hospital bed for several weeks, have to potentially borrow money to afford implants to fix their broken bones. And then after waiting how long to get through to for their surgery, they finally get surgery. And within weeks of getting surgery, before the bone has even healed, they're back on the motorcycle and crashing again. And so they're so satisfied with our service that they kept coming back for more. And so that's where it really started. Now, when I graduated and went north to the St. Anne's Bay Regional Hospital, motorcycle crashes, as you're well aware, the fatalities continued to increase. And so it was always topical in the news. And of course, St. Anne's Bay is located right off the highway. So there's no shortage of motorcycle crashes that we see. In fact, it accounts for 25% of the trauma that we see at a given time on the male ward. And so I decided that this really needs to be looked into to see if there is something that I can do in terms of finding out cause and effect and see if I can make a difference. I was inspired by my mother, she was a part of the community mental health program, and she formulated it and was therefore a part of legislation and policy. And so I am trying to follow in her footsteps in that regard.
Wow.
Now, with regards to the study itself, The study was conducted over a 2-year period at the St. Anne's Bay Regional Hospital, and it was led by me in the orthopedic department. We came together and we put together a questionnaire which formed the basis for the data that we collected, because it's impossible to do research retrospectively. You have to collect the information then and there in order to get quality information. Now, we asked a number of questions ranging from socio-demographic information such as age, gender, chronic medical illnesses, whether you smoke or drink, your occupation, and your weekly earnings from your occupation to get an idea of the economic profile, the cost of the motorcycle. We looked at rider factors in terms of whether or not you were wearing a helmet or not. If you were not wearing a helmet at the time of the crash, what was the reason that you weren't wearing a helmet? And then now, we looked at things like the injuries itself. So whether you had a soft tissue injury or whether you had a bony injury, aka a fracture. And we looked at the location of the injuries in terms of which body part or which region was involved, which region of the body was involved. We looked at the need for hospital admission and the need for surgical intervention, and what were the body parts that most commonly needed to be operated on. Essentially, we then collected that information within 24 hours of the person coming to the accident and emergency to minimize recall bias. After that, on a weekly basis, I basically went behind the doctors that assisted me in collecting the data. So Doctors Jackson, McLaren, Lindo, and Cole predominantly. And then I went home and put the data together on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. After that, I then contacted a couple of epidemiologists at the university, and they then did further statistical analysis, because I didn't want to simply just put out numbers. I wanted to go higher level and basically be aware of what is statistically significant, what is going to make a difference or not. So that's a summary of the study itself.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor. I know we have several questions, but the first thing that I wanted to ask you, was this study required as a part of your, what do you call it? Was it required as a part of your tenure? Yeah.
No, this is all personal interest solely. The St. Anne's Bay Regional Hospital is not a site in which you get promoted if you do research. There's no professor, there is no increase in pay or salary. No, it's purely out of personal interest. It's something that
you and your colleagues, because you mentioned some other colleagues, by the way, I'd love you to mention their names again, but you and your colleagues did this entirely as a personal effort because of your interest in the medicine or because of whatever the interests were. That's what you're saying?
Correct. So the colleagues that I referenced are all my junior staff in the orthopedic department, which is headed by Derek McDowell.
Yes. No,
let me just be clear, I'm not the head of the department, but I was the one that led the research.
Yes, well, I certainly understand that. So tell me now, and I just want to go to this thing because Dr. Jones mentioned it last week, and I know you saw that. The helmet wearing,
yes.
How significant is that or is not? And what did you find in your research on that?
All right, so what we found was that there was overall, the helmet compliance was 29%, right?
Less than 1 in every 3 wore a helmet.
Right. Now, let us look at this a little further. In terms of the ages, I'm digressing a bit and then I'm going to answer the question.
That's all right.
In terms of the ages seen in the study, it ranged from age 14 to 64 and an average age of 28 years. 2/3 of the study population was under the age of 40 years. And almost half of the study population, 47%, were in their 20s. The teenagers made up around 9%, right? So the main area, the main group that we have to target are the people in their 20s, both in terms of helmet compliance and in terms of injuries. When you look at the national data, it's the persons in their 20s that are dying at the highest rate in terms of the fatality data that's put out by the Road Safety Unit. So it's pretty consistent. So when we looked at helmet compliance by age group, and that's why I digress briefly, the persons in their 20s had an 81% non-compliance rate, right? So this is important in terms of our public educational messages. When we put together an advertisement, we have to gear it towards what the 20-odd-year-old person deems important, what is going to emotionally touch them to change their perception and their behavior. Now,
4 out of 5 in their 20s did not wear a helmet.
that's correct.
Yeah.
The teenagers actually led the way at 92%, but as I said, I'm more concerned about the persons in their 20s because of their sheer volume in the study population. Now, looking a little further at helmet compliance, remember I mentioned earlier that I looked at why it is they weren't wearing a helmet. So 53% of those not wearing a helmet, it was because they were riding for a short distance. Now, this finding is not an accident. As you have mentioned earlier, my studies have been published, and these studies actually have been cited by other authors, and they have similarly found that riding for a short distance is one of the main factors in terms of not wearing your helmet. It's very similar to not bothering to put on your seatbelt because you're just going just up the road. It's the very same concept. So, public education message number 2 from this is just because you're traveling for a short distance, it only takes 1 second for a fatality or a major injury to occur. Now, what we further found in terms of helmet wearing is that we looked at license and insurance. A quarter of our riders had a license and a quarter had insurance. Now, I decided to look at that because we were looking at the roadworthiness of the rider itself as opposed to our fitness and the roadworthiness of the vehicle. Now, in terms of those who had a license and insurance, there was a 57% rate of helmet compliance amongst that group. So what does that tell you then? That those who take risks are uniformly taking risks. They're not wearing their helmets, not licensed, not insured.
Not insured. No.
The
But I
other
was
thing
asking you, how important is the helmet? I mean,
there's one more thing I want to mention about helmets, and that is that we had a 31% head injury rate, and of those who suffered head injuries, only 10% of them were wearing a helmet.
Yeah. Right.
wow.
So it is clear that the the victims, most of the victims, they are, as the research pointed out, that they are not licensed riders, they don't have insurance, right?
No.
And these are the young people who
Yes.
are just riding carelessly.
I
Right?
want to mention one other thing before I forget. Remember, I said that, I'm not sure if I said how many people were in the study. It was 155 people that we saw in 2 years. Now, I'm going to invite the panel to guess how many of them you think were formally trained.
Were what?
You can give me a guess.
Were
One-
what?
Formally trained.
Yes.
Well, I think based on what we are seeing, I think most of these victims were not trained.
Give me a figure.
That is my.
Give me one guess, one figure. How many were trained?
You mean out of the 100 and
55, yes.
about 20?
What's your
I
guess,
would
Mr. McKnight?
I would say about 30.
And your guess, ma'am?
I would say 15.
Okay, so the answer is 3.
My God.
Yeah.
What do you mean? 3?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and one of the advantages of doing studies prospectively is that
No, what do you mean? Sorry, Doctor. I mean,
I'm going to tell you, sir. So one of the advantages of doing research prospectively is that you get a chance to really know who you're dealing with, right? So I can give you details to the 3 persons. The first one is a Canadian tourist living in Canada. So he counts statistically but does not count practically.
Yes.
Yeah.
The second one is a police officer that was trained as part of his training in the police force.
Yes.
And the third person is a rider at Dover. So therefore, none of the 3 is the typical Jamaican citizen.
Right.
No.
So practically, none are formally trained.
No.
Yes.
And so one of the major things, anytime I talk about motorcycle injuries, the way forward, the government needs to formally fund the training so that we not only improve the skill level, but we can change the mindset of the riders in terms of improving the compliance, in terms of not only helmets, but appropriate protective gear, because we need to actually protect the lower limbs as well. When you ask me about the injuries later on, I can give you details on the injuries. We need lower limb protective gear in addition to the helmets in order to properly protect ourselves. And training also will help to change the mindset in terms of responsible riding, lack of speeding, lack of careless overtaking, lack of the quote-unquote out and stunting style of riding.
Dr. Fletcher, since you did this study, what years were it covered again?
Okay, so this study was done between 2016 and 2018, but what I can tell you with confidence is if I were to repeat the study again, the figures would be similar.
I was going to ask you that, but I was going to ask you, is there anything that has changed in the way from what you see now? Because I know you're a man of science, but is there anything that has changed significantly since that time?
No. And in fact, COVID came after the study, and when motor vehicle crashes on the whole went down in terms of from the perspective of hospital admissions because the traffic volume was significantly decreased in terms of lockdown periods and so on.
Yes.
The motorcyclists did not slow down. We continued to have admissions from motorcycle crashes at roughly the same rate.
Yes.
Can you just tell us now what sort of injuries are people suffering? You mentioned head injuries. I can't remember. I think you said about 30% of them. I can't remember. You are here.
I'll break it down for you. So
okay.
Let me give a quick definition. So first definition is the upper limb is from the shoulder to the finger, and the lower limb is from the hip to the toe, right? So leading the way were lower limb injuries at 55%. upper limb injuries at 35%, head injuries at 31%, pelvis and spine each at 5%. Now, it's not going to add up to 100 before you ask me that, because because persons would have had injuries in more than one area.
Yes. Yes. And what about the treatment of those and the costs involved in that treatment? What did you explore that? The cost to the system, if not to the rider himself or herself, because they bear some cost, but the cost to the system.
I don't have the details in terms of the cost to the system, because the study wasn't geared towards that. And that in all honesty requires a team dedicated to look at cost, because you see, the cost of care project that came out in 2017, which I have nothing to do with, gave a cost of $263,000 per motorcycle crash. But that cost only looked at the immediate cost in terms of the blood tests, the x-rays, intravenous fluids, medications. That's the on-the-spot cost. But costs go well beyond that in terms of all of the issues to do with the ward care, whether it is the food, the linen, cleaning, and that sort of thing, to the operating theater with the drugs that you use, the gases that you use, the salaries of the staff, to even more long-term in terms of the time lost from work, because a lot of these people are in their working prime, and these injuries take them out for months. So the lost income and the cost to the company or whatever the workplace is, all of those, that requires a dedicated team. So I don't have that answer for you. In terms of the body areas that required surgery, the thigh was 91%, the leg was 78%, and the ankle 63%. And those are the commonest areas that needed surgical intervention. Hence why I said that our riders really need to protect their lower limbs in addition to wearing helmets.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No,
There are some.
Sorry, go ahead, Desmond.
No, what I was about to say, I know of some protective gears for lower limbs. I have seen that already, but I don't see much of that in Jamaica.
No. None of our riders wore protective gear at the time of the crash.
No.
In terms of, I'm talking about the gear outside of helmets.
Yeah, none of the 155 that was in the study.
No.
Yes.
Dr. Fletcher, what would you? I know that there are several medical people that I know of who have spoken to me. In fact, one spoke to me about the research. What sort of feedback have you had from the people who, and I'm going to use the term loosely, people who make policy in Jamaica, or the people who deal with this particular matter? What sort of responses you have had?
Okay. In terms of feedback, they responded pretty much to the data regarding alcohol. So 37% of the riders were potentially under the influence, and what that meant is that they consumed alcohol within 3 hours of the crash. And this led to
that's 37%, you said?
Yes, 37% of our riders consumed alcohol within 3 hours of the crash. And of that population, 84% of them needed to be admitted to hospital. This was statistically significant.
Yes.
And you were found to be 3 times more likely to need to be admitted to hospital if you had consumed alcohol. By the way, 75% of those who turned up to the accident and emergency room required admission to hospital. And 53% of the study population needed surgery. So that's an index of the severity of injuries that we saw. Going back to that question about alcohol now. So that bit of data in terms of the need for hospital admission, the powers that be then I think started to work out the dollar signs in terms of the free healthcare and what it means when so many people are admitted as a result of alcohol. The response has been an acknowledgement to ramp up the breathalyzer testing. Now, I don't really want to speak to the results of the breathalyzer testing. I prefer if you probably contact ACP Gary McKenzie on that one. But needless to say, there is an acknowledgement that it needs to be increased. And we need to get higher numbers in terms of a pickup rate for positive cases. There is also contemplation in terms of changing what is considered to be the legal value.
And what about the use of ganja?
All right.
And other drugs.
So marijuana now, the thing about it is that marijuana is a lot more challenging to speak about than the alcohol. The reason being is that similar to alcohol, there is no objective testing done on any of the riders in the study, through no fault of mine, of course. And just to digress very briefly, marijuana testing and enhanced blood alcohol level testing is something that I am really pushing for in terms of the next steps to solving this problem. And I'm a bit frustrated in terms of the slow pace at which that has gone over the past 5 years or so that I've been affiliated with an NRSC. But going back to the question now, in terms of marijuana, why I said that it is difficult to speak to it is because unlike the alcohol, where you've got a history of them consuming alcohol, and many of them could actually admit to some changes in their judgment, their perception, etc. The person smoking marijuana, which was, by the way, 42% of the study population, they smoked every day and multiple times per day, and they did not admit to any cognitive changes. And so as such, we really would need to have objective testing to make a formal statement on it.
Dr. Fletcher, we coming towards the end of this segment. Just want to wrap up with you. But I'd love to know what would you propose now to the, I don't know if it's a road safety council or to the police or to whoever the authorities are, from your research, from your observations generally, otherwise just as a citizen, not a doctor. It obviously it's costly, it obviously has some negatives around it. What would you propose now to help bring down those levels of crashes involving motorcyclists?
Okay, so first and foremost, getting access to for the riders for formal training. There aren't a lot of formal training schools. So it's one thing to actually say, boy, only 3 out of the 155, but they're not readily accessible training centers. So we need to have accessible training centers. And I spoke earlier in terms of the reasons as to why formal training is important. The next thing is public educational messages have to be targeted and they have to be sustained. And based on my research, that means at least 1 year of a consistent message. So some of the things that popped up in the research, as I mentioned, was that persons in their 20s and 30s and the teenagers are the top groups that we need to use their language and find messages that are going to appeal to them in terms of compliance. the acceptance for the need for helmet wearing as well as protective gear in the other parts of the body needs to be enhanced. And of course, enforcement. Now, currently our enforcement is predominantly static policing, where meaning there's a police at on the road, and a lot of times the motorcyclists fly past them and the police aren't allowed to chase them down. So I really think that electronic enforcement, whereby we have a situation where you can coordinate the cameras that are in the country, for example, Jamaica Eye, as well as the National Works Agency cameras, can be used in conjunction with Mona Geoinformatics crash map, which gives details in terms of the hotspots. When you coordinate that, that can then give you an idea of the best places for police deployment, and then it also gives you an avenue for catching offenses electronically and dealing with the issue then and there. So I think electronic enforcement is really the way to go, or else we've been talking about this year in, year out. Last but not least, the alcohol and the marijuana testing, both in the living as well as in the dead. We need to get an idea of cause and effect. There are multiple studies out there that when toxicology screens are performed on the fatalities, that it turns out positive. We need to know what's happening in terms of cause and effect in our fatalities, especially since our motorcyclists are the number one in terms of fatalities in road users for a while. One of the issues that has been problematic is that doctors are hesitant to perform the blood alcohol testing because of the fear of assault in terms of the patient's rights. And so we have been waiting on the legislators to find a way to get around this problem. And that's what I think. We need to basically come up with a way to get around this problem so that what needs to be done can be done.
Dr. Fletcher, for those who just joined us, Dr. Fletcher is an orthopedic surgeon. He's an orthopedic surgeon at the St. Anne's Regional Hospital. We want to thank you very much, sir, for enlightening us about this research that you did, and the fact that there are so many negative behaviors which are highlighted by you, but your recommendations are interesting. I can tell you the education part of it is going to be difficult, sir, because Dr. Jones told us last week that the Road Safety Council has no budget for education, none, zilch. So that's going to be very difficult, and I'm not very optimistic, sir, about the enforcement issues either, because Jamaica is not a place where much enforcement takes place for anything. So I want to commend you on the research and thank you on behalf of our really grateful people, grateful nation, that you have been able to take on something that is so significant from your own resources, from your colleagues, yourself and your colleagues have taken it on. And really want to thank you very much, sir, for the work. And we look forward to talking to you another time about the recent work you have done with pedestrians.
Before he goes, Franklin, I'd love to read before he goes, I'd love to read the comments, and I have a question. Read the sample. The sample for the study, was it drawn from St. Anne only?
Okay, so because St. Anne's Bay is the regional hospital, it's not only St. Anne's Bay that's represented or captured in the data. It's predominantly...
I'm sorry, I meant parish, not St. Anne's Bay, but the parish.
Yeah, that was a slip of the tongue. Sorry.
Yeah.
So the Northeast region consists of St. Anne, St. Mary, and Portland. So those three parishes would form the bulk of the studies. But we also got persons from Clarendon, St. Thomas, and Montego Bay. St. James, sorry.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I'll tell you why I asked the question, because I noticed that we have many, many more bikes now than we used to have in my area and in Maypen. Many more bikes, many more young people are riding. So maybe if that is done again, you'd have many, many more. And the results, I suppose the outcome would be similar, but you'd have larger numbers.
Yes.
Yes. So
When you wanted to read the comments,
yes, let me read the comments. Marva Hewitt, can you show me that? It should be illegal to carry children and infants on these pillions. The parent or driver should be charged. That's one comment from Marva Hewitt, our regular viewer. And Jeffrey Worrell sends greetings, Ruby and Forbes. And Luke Thomas Shorter says, interesting analysis. Yes, I'm reading from the side there. So good that you have joined and you have your comments coming. Keep them coming. And it's really informative, especially the number of persons trained. I suppose that is really an area that we really, really need to pay close attention to.
Thank you very much, Winnie. Thanks again, Dr. Fletcher. And really, commendations on your work, your research. And I'm sure you've got a lot of that from your colleagues already.
Well, thank you, Mr. McKnight. You mentioned that there is no budget for public educational messages, but it is shows like this that assist in getting the word out there. So thank you too.
Okay, thanks, sir. Okay, thanks. Desmond Richards, we want to jump to you now on a related area, not the crashes, but the related area of the roads. You have an interest in what's going to happen to the parochial roads, Desmond. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know where to start with the road thing, but it seems to me that more and more people are recognizing the state of the roads. Desmond, you go ahead.
Well, as you know, and listeners and viewers would know, that the parochial roads, they are in the worst conditions. I'm talking about those roads, that take you to the districts, take you to the housing schemes all over Jamaica. They are in terrible condition. And based on the plan set out, which is supposed to start, the Spark program is supposed to be, the contract is now signed as the Chinese company, and that is supposed to get started this week. I know that MPs are doing road works in their constituencies. That is going on. But what I find out is that when I talk to the MPs and the councillors, the money allocated for the job is insufficient. And therefore, with the best intentions, that those parochial roads, most of them are not going to be touched at all. And therefore, the people in rural Jamaica, all over, they are going to continue to suffer the inconvenience of the bad roads. This is a reality.
Well, Desmond, one of my concerns is how the assessment, and Joshua Black is showing us some really terrible roads there. You can hardly believe some of them. But one of the things is that I don't know how the determination is made with regard to roads. I mean, that requires really a full discussion, and I've been asked myself about it. the determination, Desmond, as to these roads. And I think one of the economists that you have used on video did say that it is the parochial roads that should be the main roads that are dealt with. I don't, not main roads, but the parochial roads, because that is where the economy is really based. That is where a lot of the action really comes from. But I don't know how that is done, Desmond. I don't know what the, I don't know if you know how the determination is done.
Well, what I know is that the councillors were asked to submit 10 of the most important or the most crucial roads as part these are to be part of the program for the Spark program. But the councillors are saying that they have not received any response. They don't know if these roads are going to be addressed. I don't know the real program myself.
All right. Okay. I see Winnie smiling, so she's not too upset that we have used up her time again. But that's our show. She's not too upset, maybe a little bit. That's our show for today. It's episode 148 of the Frankly Speaking Jamaica podcast. Remember, please subscribe to the Frankly Speaking Jamaica YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us again and for sharing with your friends. Keep the comments coming. Thanks to our special guest, Dr. Carey Fletcher, orthopedic surgeon, and for his invaluable research. Thanks to Winnie Anderson-Brown, Desmond Richards, and technical producer Joshua Black Media Services. I'm Frankly McKnight. Until then.